What places in America should foreigners avoid at all cost? Story 1. Steaming acidic hot springs in Yellowstone. I visited Montana. There was a coffee shop in a little town by the entrance to Yellowstone that had a death pool for when the next tourist would die by either going off the trail to be boiled alive in the hot springs or trying to pet a bear or buffalo. You gave $1 and predicted the day. If someone died on your day, you won the pot. Honestly, avoid Colorado in general. Unless you know how it works there, it's a little funky. Laws are different. It's a high-altitude desert, so we have fire bans pretty often. And honestly, I'm kinda sick of hearing helicopters fly overhead to go save a tourist who attempted to hike without bringing water or a snack or just wasn't prepared in one way or another. But we rely on tourists here to survive too. Just do some freaking research before coming here. If you don't work out, then don't try the incline. Seriously, they had to start charging people to get saved from the incline because too many people were trying it and they weren't prepared for it. Oh, and leave Graffiti Falls alone. Used to be called Rainbow Falls, but people kept graffitiing all over it. I think we should avoid mass tourism in nature regardless of where it is. Story 2. Avoid going to one location thinking another location across the country is a short trip. Back in the mid-90s, I picked up a Japanese girlfriend at San Francisco Airport. We had a few days to kill before we had to start driving back to my place, so I asked her what she'd like to do. Could we go to New York City? She had a difficult time comprehending the distances involved. My wife and I were in Ireland, and the hosts of our B&B told us that their friends were staying in Orlando. They had plans to drive to Chicago for dinner. We laughed ourselves sick. This was in the late 90s before most folks had a GPS that told them how long it took to get places. By the way, driving around Ireland with nothing but paper maps was an effing nightmare, mainly because asshole tourists kept stealing all of their road signs. This just made me realize what a blessing Google Maps really is. Story 3. If you're in a national park, listen to what the caution signs say and don't venture off of paths. One is because of wildlife and the other is because humans don't need to ruin everything in nature just to get a photo. Also, don't fall into the Grand Canyon. You will die. The thing that struck me about the Grand Canyon and other such wilderness areas in national parks is how unregulated it is, in the sense that you can just wander off into the wild at any time 24/7 and get yourself in serious trouble if you're unprepared. You're strolling down a trail surrounded by tourists and all of a sudden you realize that it's 100 degrees Fahrenheit. You don't have enough water and it's a 2,000-foot climb back up to the rim. Or that you can literally walk a few yards from a gift shop and fall right into the biggest hole you can imagine. My in-laws were leaving a trail one afternoon. They'd hiked in and camped overnight. A few guys from Germany pulled up to the trailhead and they got up to chatting a bit. The Germans were planning on hiking up and camping that night, but my in-laws noticed they didn't have much gear aside from their tent, their sleeping bags, and their food. No first aid kit, no rope, no wet weather backup gear, and most importantly, no bear bag. They asked, "What's a bear bag?" My in-laws explained that it's a really bad idea to keep food in or near your tent. You put the food in the bag and pull it up into the air by a rope over a branch. Keeps the bears out. The German guys had no idea that there were bears. They had no idea that there were cougars. Germany doesn't have either. My in-laws were well enough off that they went ahead and gave the guys a bunch of their survival gear and wished them luck. People really underestimate how dangerous Mother Nature can be. Story 4. Gary, Indiana. Americans should avoid it as well. I can't quite put my finger on it, but living in the St. Louis area, I still feel like people have some small amount of hope for East St. Louis. But Gary? Hope was murdered in Gary many years ago. It gets sucked out of you when you get near. I've also never been scared of places, like going to bad neighborhoods and such. Gary scares the life out of me. I was recently having a conversation with a friend who lives half the year in the US and the other half of the year in an East African country. He was showing me photos of his home, and it was not what I, an ignorant white guy, thought it would be. His response was, imagine if the rest of the world only got news about Gary, Indiana, but it was presented as though it was a representative of the entire United States. Yikes. Don't want to get stuck in that place. Story 5. Death Valley in the summer, especially if you consider yourself a strong hiker and live in a cooler climate. It has that name for a reason. I live in the southern US, and not even the hottest parts of it. At least I live on the ocean, and I can't tolerate being outside. It was in the 80s degrees Fahrenheit, and I thought I was going to have a heat stroke, and I've lived here my whole life. I sit outside in the morning for like 20 minutes before I'm drenched in sweat, but it is in the sun. I have no problem sitting outside at the same temperature in the evening when I'm in the shade. I hate summers though, and I don't know where or how I will escape the heat of the future. As a medical professional who works in a high temperature region that can get up to 115 to 120 at the height of summer, even the most experienced hikers who replete all of their electrolytes properly should not risk this. There's no reason to, even if you want to prove it to yourself. I know there is that crazy run in Death Valley, but that run is only made by ultra-marathon runners who have a literal death wish and want to keep pushing the limits of human endurance, who train all year round to do so and understand the risks and dangers of doing so. We see a lot of heat stroke and heat exhaustion, including people who literally fry themselves by doing crazy stuff like working outdoors all day in 115-degree heat. Even with chugging Gatorade, eating salty foods, etc., they still cannot withstand that much heat for that long a period of time. Our bodies evolved away from being able to do this a long time ago, and unless you've been training for years to do so, hiking in this sort of heat should be avoided. The region I work in has a lot of agriculture, with farmers who have been working the land for decades and have managed just fine for 30 years, who comes in and ends up intubated and placed on comfort measures from organ failure due to being outside too long in the heat. What they don't say is that they've done it for decades, but on that day they decided to push themselves a little harder and not take a break from the heat by going in the shade for a little bit, or taking a long break inside their car or a house with AC. Most times it's continuous prolonged exposure to very high temperatures. Doesn't matter what you do, if you haven't trained your body to push itself to the limit like the crazies who run desert ultramarathons train, continuous exposure to the sun and really high temperatures are going to be deadly. Death Valley? More like a death wish. Story 6. Don't hike into the wilderness of Colorado, especially 14ers, without knowing wilderness survival and responsibilities. Tourists die on our mountains and in the Rocky Mountain National Park all the time. Do your research. Altitude is no joke. I went rock climbing with 2 friends in my 20s. We didn't know what we were doing. Did 2 days at the Garden of the Gods and found out we were belaying wrong the first day. Then we did a 14K mountain. I had not trained but was in overall fantastic shape at the time. It was incredibly difficult. We scaled the mountain and walked back down in 1 day, running out of water at the top. We should have died. Looking back on it, it was so irresponsible and stupid. I remember thinking during our climb that one wrong move could mean a broken limb, etc., and getting EMS out there with no cell service would not be an easy feat. After the climb, I was severely dehydrated, the worst I've ever felt from dehydration in my life. I like to believe I'm a smarter person now. Never again. Got lost hiking around Aspen with some friends in the mountains. All of our phones were dead. We didn't have a compass and we were out of water. It was all fun and games until we realized we had walked a mile in the wrong direction off the path and the sun was setting soon. Thankfully, one of our phones turned on long enough to open the compass app for a few seconds and get our bearings. Otherwise, we were really close to just screaming for help or walking around lost until night fell and dealing with spending the night in the mountains without shelter and bears. By the time we got back to camp, my legs and hands were numb and I puked from exhaustion for a while. Seems like one wrong move and you're done. Story 7. Trenton, New Jersey. It's the state capital, and there is a good museum, but it looks like a bombed-out, looted crap hole, and I won't even stop at red lights while in Trenton. I grew up in Chicago, and used to have a job traveling all over the US. I would like to think that I have a good danger radar and keep my head on a swivel. I was working once in Trenton and went for a walk. Within 5 minutes of leaving the hotel, I realized that I had made a grave error and was deep into unfriendly territory. It's an incredible experience to realize that the entire surrounding neighborhood is aware of you and actively hates you. 2 days later, a car full of attorneys was almost carjacked on the way to closing arguments at the federal courthouse. We narrowly avoided it by the quick thinking of the 50-something nerdy attorney behind the wheel who gunned it in reverse and took off the wrong way down some one-way streets. It was like 6 blocks from the hotel to the courthouse, but we had been warned not to attempt to walk it. There was this awesome Rastafarian vegan soul food restaurant that was great though. New Jersey abandoned its cities in the 1970s and only recently started reconsidering that strategy. There is no excuse for Trenton not being a beautiful city, but the state of New Jersey messes up that city so hard. No investment, huge chunks of the most valuable real estate are owned by the state, and a decent amount by the United States, like the bankruptcy court and federal courthouse, meaning they get no property taxes for any of that land. Trenton Station, a major transportation hub that connects New York and Boston to Baltimore and Washington, D.C., and also his light rail to Camden, is in the middle of nowhere. You would have to cross 2 major roads, including Route 1, to get to the Mill Hill neighborhood. Mill Hill is beautiful and has great places to eat, but it's struggling because it gets heck all from New Jersey and absolutely no benefit from the train station being literally 2 blocks away. There are nice, albeit struggling, parts of Trenton besides Mill Hill, residential and commercial, but you would never see it passing through because the city and the entire state are designed by and for commuters who are afraid of black people. I lived in Camden for a couple of years, and it's the same story but worse. Now, as New Jersey is licensing marijuana dispensaries, they are making sure to do it in a way that makes these business franchises that will suck money out of cities like Trenton like a vacuum, rather than allowing businesses actually invested in the city to operate. You definitely don't want to leave your house in this neighborhood. Story 8. The Kensington area of North Philadelphia. Just don't. One of my exes lived there for a few years. Little 5'2" blonde girl who thought she was gonna die every day until she got a big ol' Shar-Pei. Nobody messed with her on her walks after that because they were terrified of the literal giant fighting dog. Her house got shot up a few times during drive-bys though, and she tried being home before it got dark. Told me to avoid that neighborhood like the plague, and I've always thought that was a good bit of advice. My wife and I decided to go on holiday to Philadelphia once. We didn't know the city and booked an Airbnb in Kensington. It was eye-opening. That said, I had a fantastic time. If you can get your head around the rampant social deprivation and drug problems, it's got some cool stuff. I found a McDonald's that hadn't been touched since the 90s. If the locals tell you not to go somewhere, just take that U-turn out of there. Story 9. Not American, but as a visitor trying to travel on the cheap, I made the mistake of booking a Greyhound bus ride. There's a reason why it was cheap. Yeah, I had a guy next to me overdose on a Greyhound once. When I realized I was trying to help him and another passenger rolled their eyes and just said, "He's on drugs," like it was just another Tuesday. The bus driver didn't even really want to stop until I pointed out the guy was unconscious and vomiting weird biohazard fluid that was flowing up the bus aisle all the way to the front. Cheap tickets though. Guy got resuscitated, don't worry. This is not a joke. I have only traveled on a Greyhound bus for a trip once. On that trip, a large bald man sat in the seat in front of me, got situated, pulled out his book, then very casually took out a clean washcloth and put it on top of his head. I was totally perplexed by this until the bus started moving and water that was somehow trapped in the overhead lights began dripping out on everyone's heads. My man knew that he was going to get dripped on and had simply accepted his fate, recognizing full well that Greyhound didn't give a crap and would never address a clear issue. For that and many other reasons, after that crap show of a trip, I vowed never to ride Greyhound again. These are the cheap thrills you don't want. Story 10. I see no one has said it, so I'm going to. Hollywood. Hollywood has like a single block of its area that's actually worth a visit. It's the one with the Chinese theater, but the rest of the city is the complete opposite of the rose-tinted glass view it shows itself as. It's not even the fact that it's crowded that's the issue really, but it is definitely a rude issue too. It's filthy. There's not only garbage everywhere, but it's never clean. You could make a game out of how much vomit, piss, booze, and cum stains there are. The people are scary. Not just the homeless people, who are in a depressingly large number, but people in general seem to have a screw loose. There are also a lot of entrepreneurs trying to sell their businesses, and they aren't afraid to be in your face about it. Don't expect any decent eating either, unless you bleed gold and crap diamonds and make reservations a month in advance. There's no food to be had there. Overall, it's just not worth the visit. Do you want to see an entertainment capital worth your time? Visit Universal Studios theme park. Now there's an actual good time to be had. 100%. Every time my family visited and wanted to go to the Walk of Fame, I said I'll drive down the street and look out, and they would say no, they want to get out. So I took the subway and said get off Hollywood and Highland, and you would return to the next train and say, yeah, smelled like piss and was just a sidewalk, to which I'd reply, yep, nothing great. However, if you're going to do it, early morning on a weekday is ideal, especially for Melrose 5th Ave before stores open. It's quite pretty when empty, and they do a pretty decent job cleaning streets, at least pre-COVID times. Hollywood is a toilet with limos. Every time there's an award ceremony, they bulldoze the homeless and put red carpets and bunting around the burned out souvenir stands, but that's Tinseltown for you. It's full of people crammed 8 into an apartment, if they're lucky, trying to go broke and starve as slowly as possible while making short films about one another's dreams dying. You think you've seen public urination? Maybe at night behind a bar in a dark alley? Okay, how about in the middle of an afternoon in the middle of the street by a guy wearing a suit twice? Different guys, different streets. LA can be fun to visit, and I have a lot of great friends there, but Hollywood is no place for humans to actually live. Stick to the beaches and mountains, the expensive restaurants and the shopping, or better yet, just go to the Bay Area. You know what they say, Hollywood's fake and gross. Story 11. I'll say it, Gatlinburg and Pigeon Forge, Tennessee. Too many people and it's a huge tourist trap. While the Smoky Mountains are beautiful, you can enjoy less crowded scenery by staying in North Carolina and visiting the park around that side. Also, the Cherokee National Forest is magnificent. I live a few hours from there, which is why I mentioned it. Dollywood is about the only reason I'd go up to visit. I live close to many great hiking areas and national forests, so I have no need to see the national park, where I can't even bring my dog. It's just not worth it to point someone in that direction if they're visiting. I'll tell them to go to different areas. I went through there accidentally on a road trip once. I was going down some dirt road the GPS routed me through with metal barns and ran down houses on either side. It looked like something from the Dukes of Hazzard. Then we came over a hill and intersected a major road that looked like a miniature Branson, Missouri. It was the wildest. Pancake house, laser tag, pancake house, go-karts, pancake house, laser tag, pancake house, go-karts, pancake house, Shoney's, Dollywood. Went to Pigeon Forge once for a softball tournament my daughter's team played in. It was freaking nuts. I live in Wisco and thought the Wisconsin Dells was a tourist trap. Nope. Using baseball as an analogy, Pigeon Forge is at the professional level and the Dells is in the D League. I will never go back, but did enjoy the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. Now that just sounds like one big trap. Story 12. If you wouldn't go there in your home country, don't go there in a foreign country. What I mean is, every city has a bad neighborhood. Either research before you go, or ask around while you're there. Every country has a rural backwoods area, known for being a bad place for foreigners. Learn where it is and avoid it. Every tourist destination has tourist traps. Learn what kind of traps to look out for in your destination. This really depends on the particular location. I'm from Chicago, living in Seattle. Chicago has much worse stats than Seattle when it comes to crime, for example. Chicago's crime scene is mostly centered around gang violence in particular neighborhoods where old/entrenched gangs rule the streets. Seattle is primarily related to rampant homelessness and drug abuse. However, in Chicago, the crime areas and where tourists would generally go do not overlap at all. It's quite obvious when you cross that line, which means bad/good neighborhoods are generally separated by clear boundaries, like a highway or a big city park or rail yard, etc. Seattle is the opposite. The downtown is filled with tourists, and one block may be clean and friendly. The next block over is blocked by encampments, druggies, boarded up windows, etc. I live in downtown Seattle, and I feel far less safe here after a rush hour than I ever did in Chicago. There are definitely hobos in downtown Chicago, but the Seattle ones are far more obnoxious and unpredictable. I don't mind panhandling Chicago, but it's a problem problem when it becomes open drug use, open littering, needles, human waste, constant property crimes for drug money, regularly parked cars with smashed windows, and simply just getting screamed at. I've been screamed at by a homeless person here 3 times in less than a year. Maybe happened once in Chicago in the 25 years I'd spent there. Pre-internet, my spouse and I decided to visit Branson, apparently a hot country and western spot. Somehow, we ended up in Branson, Ohio and got lost looking for our hotel. We were driving down a residential street and people were standing on their front porches staring at us. We weren't the same color. We stopped at a light and a cop pulled up beside us and gestured for me to roll down the window. Then he says, "You folks lost?" Yep. He told me to follow him and he drove us to our hotel. I'm assuming we were in a bad neighborhood, or more specifically the wrong color for that neighborhood. By contrast, I've never felt unsafe anywhere in Canada, and certainly not because I was a specific color. Yeah, sometimes you just know whether or not a place is safe to visit or not. Story 13. New Orleans during Mardi Gras and Manhattan, New York during New Year's. If you like the smell of pee, crap, and vomit, ignore my advice. American here, I went to NOLA for Mardi Gras this year just because, and crap, there were so many people. We went on a Saturday, which we didn't think would be too bad, but damn, we were wrong. Our friend's phone got lifted right before we left. Spent an hour trying to find it while swatting away would-be pickpockets and trying not to drown in a sea of people. Aside from that, it was quite a fun time. I'd recommend everyone do it once. Well, during Mardi Gras, over 1 million people swarm into the city, so yeah, it's a lot of people. I lived in NOLA for over 7 years and never got pickpocketed. I literally do the same thing I do in any city involving crowds and put my stuff in my front pockets and never run into issues. The city definitely has its issues, but there is a ton of culture, amazing food, live music, and a good time. Unfortunately, many tourists stick to the French Quarter and miss out on the rest of the city. They should sell nose clips at the entrance of this city. Story 14. East St. Louis. Recently, I drove to Belleville, Illinois with my boyfriend to see his dad. The GPS took us through East St. Louis to get back to Missouri. I didn't realize where we were until I locked in on the East St. Louis sign, and at that moment, my non-existent balls dropped to the floor mat. I had never been, but I knew how bad it was thanks to similar Ask Reddit threads. It didn't just have us passing through either. It took us through the neighborhoods, or at least what was left of them, severely overgrown grass leading up to the shells of houses, fresh memorials on the curb, people stumbling down the road. You get the idea. Then Come On Eileen came on the radio, specifically the 1997 ska cover by Save Ferris. I'd like you to imagine, if only for a moment, 2 early 20s toddlers driving in a bright red shiny Mini Cooper, looking absolutely panicked, yelling over each other in the bowels of East St. Louis to possibly the least hard song ever recorded. Very scary in the moment, but extremely comical looking back now. Anyway, my car broke down a few days later and I couldn't stop thinking about what would have happened in the depths of East St. Louis. I made some friends playing craps at one of the casinos there, though, because it kept rolling the right numbers. I ended up throwing for like 20 minutes straight. The pit boss casually came over to watch me throw and was like, "Nope, this ding-dong is just drunk and lucky and he's only betting the pass, so he's not even getting paid on all of this." I could tell during Uber, though, that it was very streamlined to get into and out of the casinos without any detours. Story 15. Avoid swimming in Lake Superior. People read the name lake and get excited. What they don't realize is they're Great Lakes, inland freshwater seas. It's cold and it can be fatal. People often think the Great Lakes are just larger lakes they find in their respective countries or states. No, the Great Lakes have the environment of the North Atlantic if they had fresh water. In my state of Minnesota, it is not recommended to travel the lake in anything less than a trawler. It's not uncommon to experience turbulent weather, icebergs, or rogue waves on Lake Superior. The entire city of Duluth is more akin to a major ocean port than an industrial center. There is a huge sailing tradition in Duluth because the lake demands fear and respect. Thousands of sailors have been lost and thousands of ships rest on the bottom of just Lake Superior. Swimming or sailing on the lake is not for the faint of heart. I was working with some researchers from Czechia and the Upper Peninsula during the summer and was showing them around the area. We went to the beach and they absolutely insisted on swimming despite my warnings. After they jumped in, I think they finally understood. But it was really funny to watch. Czechs are good people and great drinkers. Don't judge a place by its name. Story 16. It's not places as much as situations that you should avoid. Depending on where you're from, you'll have some of these instincts, but not others. It's not all or nothing. But here are some situations I can see happening to a European as an example. Getting stranded in the desert, whether you're hiking without water or driving too far on a single tank of gas. There's a real risk of being stranded without very immediate help and no cell reception. Underestimating travel time. You're not going to see New York City and LA on the same trip. They're 3 time zones apart. They are actually as far apart as London, England, and Baku, Azerbaijan. You'll either be driving for a week or flying. Even things that seem close, like New York City and DC, are not actually that close. It would be about a 6-hour drive or train to get from one to the other. Trespassing. It is taken very seriously here, and you could wind up shot if you are on the wrong person's land. We do not have the right to roam, and we do have the right to bear arms. Some states even have castle laws, which consider trespassing to be sufficient reason to shoot someone in self-defense. Any places people are mentioning are places that Americans wouldn't go to either if they could help it. But if I can say one place in particular, it would be Camden, New Jersey. It's just across the river from Philadelphia and has a couple of tourist draws like the aquarium or the concert venue, but anywhere that's not those specific places is incredibly unsafe. Oh yeah, trespassing. If Europeans are in the weed-growing parts of Northern California, they should be very careful. There are areas in the mountains with no signs and all the mountain dirt roads look the same. And if you drive down the wrong one, it might be someone's growth, and they can shoot you. I feel like getting shot at would be confusing to Europeans. Maybe it's best not to go to America as a European. Story 17. Branson. It's ridiculous and the shows are lame. Silver Dollar City is the only good part besides the lakes. Come to Kansas City and eat some barbecue. We are friendly people and have nice museums and shopping, and the traffic isn't bad. And the food is pretty amazing. I'm in Branson right now. It was not my top choice for a trip, but my husband's idea. I fully agree with you. Everything is hokey and manufactured. Although I think the fantastic caverns are worth it, and the cat cafe, Mochas and Meows, is fun. Whatever you do, don't go to a timeshare presentation in Branson or anywhere else. We already made that mistake for you. Just don't do it. Story 18. I just learned something from a coworker. Apparently Asian tourists in the US are absolutely gaga over the whole cowboy/Southern American aesthetic. That's cool, I can completely get that. It's uniquely American and pretty cool for the most part. Maybe not all parts of the Southern aesthetic, but I won't blame foreigners for not understanding which bits were tied to slavery. And it makes even more sense when you consider how much inspiration Westerns drew from samurai films. Unfortunately, some businesses have picked up on this and are taking advantage of tourists who don't know any better. My coworker used to work at Cracker Barrel. They apparently used to advertise heavily at tourist hubs, handing out flyers and the whole bit. They would get multiple charter buses full of tourists every week who were there specifically to go to Cracker Barrel. If you want to see American Southern culture, do not go to Cracker Barrel. It's the worst, fakest possible version of what you're interested in. It is to rural America what Olive Garden is to Italy, and P.F. Chang's is to China. Maybe not avoid at all costs, but definitely don't seek out. Walk into any independent Greasy Spoon diner in the country and you'll get a far more authentic, better tasting, and cheaper experience. And beware of the scammers. Story 19. Not necessarily avoid it, but San Francisco is wild. If you leave things in sight in your car, there is a fairly good chance it could be stolen. It's an expensive city to visit, and having to worry about all that extra crime after paying so much to visit sucks. It's a cool city though. I wouldn't say to avoid it, I would say to be smart about visiting it though. All major cities have crimes, but it's also an iconic city with lots to do and see. Golden Gate Bridge, Golden Gate Park, Ocean Beach, The Height, The Mission, Ghirardelli Square, Fisherman's Wharf, the Embarcadero. A short drive up north along Highway 1 is gorgeous, and the North Bay is fun to explore. The Palace of Fine Arts, museums, botanical gardens, there's a ton to do in the Bay, and you could easily keep yourself busy for about a week there. But yeah, don't leave anything of value in your car. Avoid the Tenderloin and Soma and Civic Center areas, and don't walk around looking lost, especially at night. I think this is true for any metropolis. Locks aren't gonna help you in San Francisco. Thanks for watching until the end. If you have a similar story that you would like to share with us, please leave it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please leave us a like and subscribe if you haven't yet. For more videos like this one right now, stay tuned until the end of the video or stop by our channel. Thanks again, and see you next time.